the period of Japanese history beginning in the late 6th century CE and continuing until the year 710 CE is known as the Asuka Period, and is named for the location of the imperial capital during much of the period, an area slightly south of the modern city of Nara known as the Asuka region. As this is the first period of Japanese history defined by its political conditions rather than its cultural characteristics, it overlaps somewhat with the prior period, namely the Kofun or Old Tumulus period. The Asuka period begins just after the arrival of Buddhism to Japan, sees the birth of a new culture heavily colored by continental Asian influence, and ends with the implementation of a set of reforms known as the Taika Reforms, which radically restructured the country's government. As Japan prepared to enter the Asuka period, most of the country was securely under the control of the Yamato government and its great king, with policy decisions being made by a council of powerful clan leaders. The foremost of these were the leaders of the Soga and Mononobe clans, whose struggle for supremacy over one another was waged under the pretext of a dispute over whether to adopt the newly imported Buddhist religion. The Soga, having deep connections with many of the Korean and Chinese immigrants Japan had welcomed during the late Kofun period, supported Buddhism's adoption, and their military defeat and destruction of the Mononobe in 587 CE assured that the religion would deeply permeate all facets of Japanese politics, society, and culture going forward. For the next several decades, the Soga dominated Japan's political world and had a massive influence on choosing its rulers, one of whom, the Empress Suiko, or more accurately the Great Queen Suiko, moved the imperial capital to the aforementioned Asuka region. The Soga, however, were not the only powerful players in the government of this time, with another extremely important figure being Empress Suiko's nephew, Prince Umayato, who is better known to us today as Prince Shotoku. Shotoku is traditionally held to have served as Suiko's regent and been responsible for a number of key policy decisions that defined the early Asuka period, such as establishing diplomacy with China's Sui dynasty, devising a merit-based rank system for government officials, encouraging Japan's powerful families to see themselves as loyal subjects of the great king, and vigorously promoting the spread of Buddhism. We have little in the way of primary source evidence about Prince Shotoku's life and achievements, however, and his status as a saint-like figure in the canon of Japanese Buddhism means that much of his story is colored by legend, leading his actual contributions to Japanese history to be hotly debated by scholars. Either way, the enthusiastic support of Buddhism by Prince Shotoku and the Soga during this time resulted in Japan's first great boom in temple construction and the creation of Buddhist statuary. Following Shotoku's death in 622, the Soga further tightened their stranglehold over Japanese politics and elevated it to near tyrannical levels, in the process inviting a great deal of ill will from the marginalized members of the royal court. This ill will came to a head in 645 when the imperial prince Nakano-Oe, helped by a low-level government official named Nakatomi no Kamatari, assaulted and murdered the Soga patriarch in the midst of a state ceremony. Hereafter, the two men would take charge of Japan's government and conceive a series of reforms known as the Taika Reforms, which outlined a brand new structure for the country's political and administrative system modeled after those of China's Sui and Tang dynasties. The main points of this structure included making all the land and people of Japan the property of the state rather than of local lords, dividing the country into its pre-modern provinces, implementing a system wherein the state essentially loaned out the country's rice fields to its subjects and then repossessed and redistributed them when said subjects died, and establishing a new standardized tax system. For his role in overthrowing the Soga and in helping Prince Nakano-Oe push forward the Taika reforms, Nakatomi no Kamatari eventually received the new family name of Fujiwara, and his descendants would go on to become the most influential family of non-royal aristocrats in Japanese history. Prince Nakano-Oe ended his political career somewhat ignominiously by attempting to intervene in a war on the Korean peninsula and suffering a catastrophic defeat against a coalition army of the Tang Chinese and the Korean kingdom of Silla in 663. Fearing a reprisal by the continental powers, the prince began a series of anti-invasion defense measures, building a large number of coastal forts, drafting up guardsmen from across the country, and relocating the capital to a more defensible position from where he would at last officially become the country's monarch, known to us today as Emperor Tenji. These policies required a vast expenditure of resources, leading to dissatisfaction among the leaders of Japan's powerful clans, and when Nakano-Oe, aka Emperor Tenji, passed away in 671, the country briefly split into a violent succession struggle. Victory in this conflict, called the Jinshin War, was claimed by Nakano-Oe's younger brother, who defeated his own nephew, Nakano-Oe's son, thanks to his success in securing the allegiance of the country's dissatisfied clan leaders. He ascended to the throne as Emperor Tenmu, and he is thought to have been the ruler who at last discarded the title of Great King in favor of the word Tenno, the title which we translate into English as Emperor. Under Emperor Tenmu and his successor, his widow, Empress Jito, a number of policies were carried out which pushed Japan away from its coalition kingdom roots and toward the imperial bureaucracy which it would eventually become. The emperor began to be deified, clan leaders were further pushed into the role of bureaucratic government officials, and actual concrete law codes were enacted to implement the Chinese-style government system called Ritsuryo, which the Taika Reforms had outlined. If you want to know more about the Asuka period, please check out the 4th and 5th videos in my Japanese History the Textbook series, where I go into much of this information in greater depth. For learners of the Japanese language, there is also a link in the description to a playlist containing Japanese versions of some of these shorter videos, so if you're interested in seeing how Japanese history is discussed in the country's native language, be sure to check that out. As always, if you enjoyed the video, please like, comment, and subscribe, and I will see you guys in the next one.